Hello, everybody. My name is John Hagan. I'm the co-host of Shift by Alberta Innovates. I'm glad you could all join us for today's webinar with Erin Bury. A few things before we begin. We encourage respectful dialogue, and you can participate with other attendees using the group chat feature below the speaker screen. We also encourage questions, so please submit yours through the Q&A function in the taskbar below the speaker screen. A little bit about Erin. Erin is an entrepreneur, marketer, former technology journalist, and a startup advisor investor. She was previously the managing director at 88, a creative communications agency based in Toronto that works with consumer brands and technology companies, including Sony Pictures Television, TELUS, and PayPal. She's currently a monthly columnist for the Financial Post, an advisor for multiple startups, including Willful and Press News, and a board member at Save the Children Canada. Erin also comments frequently in the press, including media outlets such as the New York Times, Forbes, CNN, the Toronto Star, and Canadian Business. She was named one of Marketing Magazine's top 30 under 30, and her claim to fame is she's been retweeted by Oprah, not once, but twice. Please welcome Erin Bury.
Thank you so much, John, and hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. I'm joining you at 2 p.m. on the East Coast from downtown Toronto, and I hope that you all have your lunch, a cup of coffee, and I'm really excited to talk to you today. So we'll dive right in. I'm going to be giving a bit of a presentation and telling some stories about entrepreneurship. As John mentioned, I encourage you to pop into the chat at any time to ask questions or just to comment on your own experience as a small business owner. So the question that I really want to talk about today is, are entrepreneurs born or made? But before I answer that question, I know there's one burning question on all of your minds from that intro, which is, what did Oprah retweet? This is the number one thing that people ask me because it's in my Twitter bio. So it was actually when her network OWN came to Canada. And this was probably 2009, 2010. And if you remember when she gave out cars on the Oprah show, she said, you know, you get a car and you get a car. So I tweeted, OWN is coming to Canada today. Everybody gets OWN. And she retweeted that part, that statement, but she took out the part where I poked a little bit of fun at her. So being the enterprising, older now millennial that I am, I did email her and tell her she should hire me to work at OWN Canada, but sadly, she never responded. So the only proof that I have of our fleeting friendship is the screenshots of the tweet. So today we're talking about, getting back to this big question, we're talking about entrepreneurial mindsets and how they can help you win as a marketer. And really I've thought about this question a lot over the last decade, which is, are people born entrepreneurs or can you become an entrepreneur over time? And I'll start with telling you a little bit about my background and how I came to answer that question. You know, early on in my career, I was a journalism grad, from Carleton University in Ottawa. And just like my mom, who had also attended university at Carleton, my goal when I graduated was to work at a Fortune 500 company. I did not grow up with entrepreneurs as parents. My dad was a journalist at a local newspaper. My mom was a marketing executive at Nortel. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s when startups weren't sexy. You know, there weren't necessarily these role models like Sarah Blakely from Spanx or any of the, Mark Zuckerbergs and Jack Dorseys of the world who you could really look up to and say, I want to follow that path. So for me, it was never really, it didn't come into my mind that I would ever start my own business. I just knew that I would get that corner office and that would be the pinnacle of my career. But then I met Sarah. This is Sarah Prevet. She's a serial entrepreneur, and that's us back in probably 2008, 2009. She was a mutual friend, and I met with her for dinner, and she told me that she was starting this company called Sprouter, which was a social network for entrepreneurs, and asked if I wanted to come join as the community manager. Now, this was at the height of the recession in 2008, and I had this, steady, although not amazingly paying job at a mid-sized PR agency. But you know what? I thought about it. I thought, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to take this risk. And thankfully, I was encouraged by my family to do so. So I took the leap and I joined this tiny startup as the second employee. And I remember one day, a few weeks in, I was asking Sarah about the mission for the company. What was your goal? And she said, well, my goal, like a lot of entrepreneurs, is to sell the business. And I said, oh, because you want to go, lay on a beach. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she said, no, so I can start my next business. And it was in that moment that I realized that entrepreneurs like Sarah, these born entrepreneurs, they have ideas swimming around in their head all the time. Sarah was just executing one idea on her long list of ideas, and she wasn't looking to build and grow her company so that she could sell it. So that she could retire. She was doing it so that she could actually move to the next idea on the list, and she could execute the next big thing. And that's when I realized that entrepreneurs are born. I was not one of these people who had a million ideas swimming around in my head. And I always thought if I sold a business at some point, it would be so that I could buy a yacht in Monaco and, retire on a beach. But then a funny thing happened. I actually, through my job at Sprouter, I had a chance to meet thousands of entrepreneurs. My entire job was meeting entrepreneurs, telling their story through our social media channels and our blog. Actually, as part of Sprouter, I ended up being on the founding team at BetaKit, which is still the largest startup publication in Canada. And I got to interview people like Mark Cuban and, Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank. And really, I got addicted to these origin stories. Every time I talked to an entrepreneur, they had a story about a problem they encountered or an opportunity that they saw to fill a gap. And it always started with this moment of, wouldn't it be awesome if, and then they would tell me about their business idea. And really, I came to realize that entrepreneurs look at the world as a series of problems that they themselves can solve, instead of looking at the world as problems that they're waiting for other people to solve. And so, years later, I was at the time running a consumer tech marketing agency that worked with clients, as John mentioned, like PayPal and TELUS and a lot of startups as well. And I was out in Prince Edward County, which, if you've ever been to Ontario, is an up-and-coming wine region about 2 hours east of Toronto. And I did what I usually did every summer when I went to visit my parents there. I would go to wineries and do wine tastings, which is an extremely fun activity. And one day I was there with a couple girlfriends, and we saw a bunch of stretch limos that were driving all of these young people like me around to these different wineries. And we looked at each other and said, why is a stretch limo, the type that you would take to prom, the only type of transportation that can get you from winery to winery, when all of the wineries are so close together? They're all within a 3 or 4 kilometer loop, about 30 of them. And I had been on bicycle wine tours in Niagara Falls, another great Ontario wine region. And, in that moment, it would have been really easy to say, yeah, someone should launch bicycle wine tours here. That would be a great idea. But because I had been so exposed to this problem-solving mentality through all the entrepreneurs I met, I looked at my 2 girlfriends who also worked in communications and had lots of business acumen, and I said, why would we wait for somebody else to do it? We could launch a bicycle wine tour company. And so we spent the next year or two building this side hustle. And one of the coolest things in my career was actually going on my company's wine tour with my agency staff. So, seeing this idea that we had come to fruition with my own company for the first time. And that was a really cool moment. I'm happy to say, too, it's a family business, and my dad is the head tour guide. So if you ever come to Prince Edward County, you'll probably go on a wine tour with my dad. But in that moment, I realized that, entrepreneurs are definitely born. There are the folks like Sarah who grew up wanting to become an entrepreneur, who had lemonade stands all through their youth, who started their first business in high school, and who were destined to never work for someone else. But there are also people like me who never really intended to go into entrepreneurship, who, kind of accidentally stumbled into it. And now that I have, I'm so passionate about it and can't see myself ever not being an entrepreneur. And so that led me to wonder, with these 2 really different groups of people, the born entrepreneurs and the ones who become entrepreneurs over time, what are the qualities that really tie them together? And so today I'm going to walk you through what I believe are the 4 qualities of the entrepreneurial mindset, which if you are an entrepreneur yourself, you'll probably recognize. And if you work for an entrepreneur or aspire to be an entrepreneur, can hopefully help you with thinking about the qualities that you'll need. And really, I want you to keep in mind as I go through these, how they relate to marketing, because really that's what we're here to talk about today. How can an entrepreneurial mindset help you with marketing? So I'll dive into the 4 qualities, and I'm going to tell a story about a really interesting entrepreneur as a part of each of these qualities. And a few of them I've updated recently to reflect COVID, because I think there are so many amazing entrepreneurs who have done fantastic things during this challenging time. So let's dive into the first quality. These 2 women on the screen here are 2 of my best friends, Sheba and Genevieve. And actually, they're those 2 women I mentioned whom I started the bicycle wine tour company with. Now, Sheba and Genevieve were also not born entrepreneurs. They had worked for big companies. Genevieve, about this time, a year and a half ago, was working at TD. Sheba was working at a mid-sized communications firm. But they kind of caught the entrepreneurial bug through starting that wine tour company I mentioned, and they decided they wanted to own their own destiny and start their own business. So a couple of years ago, they started planting the seeds. What could this look like? And they knew that they wanted to focus on one topic, which was mindfulness. They're both very into meditation. They, are really into all of the kind of self-care and wellness practices that we hear successful people do, but that I somehow avoid because they seem overwhelming to me. But they knew that there was this opportunity to create a mindfulness company that targeted people like me, busy entrepreneurs and executives and business people who maybe didn't gravitate naturally towards things like meditation, but who could use these self-care tips to really succeed in their career and to add more balance to their life. So they developed this really great business plan, and their big idea was wellness retreats. We're going to get all of these busy executives to go up to cottage country in Ontario and pay us, thousands of dollars to hold these really exclusive wellness retreats. And so in 2019, they worked away on this business plan, and they were planning their first event for the summer of 2020. They quit their jobs in January of 2020 and had been saving up for, over a year so that they would be able to not take a salary for a little while. And then, of course, as we know, everything changed. They found themselves, in the midst of planning and launching an event and having just quit their jobs to start this business full time. And then all of a sudden found themselves in the middle of a pandemic where events just were not a viable option for making money, let alone they just couldn't have an event because of COVID protocols. And in that moment, I think a lot of people may have given up. They may have gone back to their corporate job. I'm sure they would have taken them back. Or they might have said, let's just wait till this blows over and let's, launch an event in 2022 or 2021. But instead, they were just really open to the idea of, we really resonated with the idea of mindfulness. We never said this has to be a series of events. So if we were thinking about something that we could do during COVID, that we could pivot to, what would that be? And they identified a gap in the market, which was a journal that helped you become more mindful through a monthly journaling practice. There were tools out there like the 5-minute journal, which was all about short daily journaling. And there were, of course, blank journals that would just help you with long form journaling, which I'll be honest, had never really appealed to someone like me, their target audience. So they pivoted. They said, we're not going to be able to do events this year, but we have to keep going with our vision. We've quit our jobs. We've come this far. We have a brand and a brand name, Mahara. And so they refocused their business plan. They developed this in a series of, I think it was 2 or 3 months. They developed a monthly mindfulness journal called the Human Being Journal. They mapped out every page of content themselves. They sourced printers, they sourced designers, they had samples published and, picked the color palette and did all of the things that are involved with creating a physical product. And then they were able to get them into their hands by late 2020. So, and in advance, they were both communications professionals. They put together this huge marketing strategy all about how journaling can actually help, employees and help people through the stress of COVID. So I'm happy to say that, Sheba, going back to my Oprah stories, Sheba, when I met her at age 22, I called her the youngest subscriber to Oprah's magazine. She's a huge Oprah fan, and Oprah's focus on mindfulness really inspired her. So they came out with this human being journal in the fall of last year. It's been featured in a ton of publications, including in Oprah's monthly must-have list this past month in January. And this, I think, is the coolest part of their story. They had stood in front of Indigo a few years ago when they had just conceptualized this mindfulness brand. And though they wanted to start with events, they always knew that there would potentially be product lines or other opportunities. And they took this photo on the left-hand side of the slide and looked and kind of manifested it and said, one day we want to be on the shelves of Indigo with some form of product that we develop as a part of this brand. And it's pretty cool that Indigo reached out to them, and they're now the exclusive retailer of Mahara's journal in Canada. So to me, this story really illustrates the first quality of the entrepreneurial mindset, which is open-mindedness. And to me, open-mindedness in entrepreneurship is all about discarding your biases. And this is especially true with marketing. Sheba and Genevieve, when they were thinking about how are we actually going to get this journal out to the world, if it was 10 years ago, they might have taken out a magazine ad or looked at, some TV advertising or things like that. But because they were launching this in 2020, they instead turned to setting up TikTok accounts and working with social influencers and sending them to celebrities like Jessica Alba, who have really big followings on Instagram, so that they could sell through that network. Instagram is now their biggest sales channel. And, they came into not only developing the product with an open mind and being open to changing that roadmap when COVID hit, but they've also come into this with a blank slate and an open mind around how they would build their customer base and their audience. So we'll talk a little bit later about how you can apply each of these qualities to your own marketing program. But until then, I think that's a pretty cool story. And if you are looking for a little bit more mindfulness in your own life, you can check them out at maharamindfulness.com. So for the next quality of the entrepreneurial mindset, I'm going to tell you about an entrepreneur named Sean, whom I mentor in Toronto, although she's currently living in BC. I think this is such a great story that also kind of highlights the necessity to pivot a business during COVID and how really innovative ideas can come out of times of uncertainty. So when I was first working with Sean, she was developing an app called Wavy, which helped you discover local events in your city. So if you lived in Toronto and you were going on a date, let's say, you could use Wavy to find all of the really cool itineraries and new restaurants and art exhibits that you might want to explore in your city. So it was a direct-to-consumer app. She was just in the early stages of building the community, and it was going okay. They were adding users at an okay clip. They were trying to figure out a monetization model. And I thought that she really had hit on something good, but I just wasn't sure about how she'd be able to monetize this and get people to pay for access to these local ideas or these local activities at scale. And when COVID hit, again, it was one of those moments where all of a sudden, nobody was doing any sort of in-person activities. No one was even leaving their homes to discover anything. And so Sean and her team had to sit back and say, okay, in an era where in-person activities are not a thing that we can base our business on, what do we do? And so they took a risk. They decided to kind of focus on an area that they saw as a growing opportunity, which is virtual events for companies. As soon as COVID happened, they realized, okay, well, in-person events are not happening. Virtual events are happening. So they were starting to host some virtual events in partnership with music festivals, and they did a big thing for Canada Day. They saw some traction from consumers, but to be honest, they kind of realized the big opportunity was on the B2B side, was selling directly to companies who were struggling with this idea of how do we create culture and how do we actually engage people around virtual events. So she completely pivoted the business from a direct-to-consumer local activity discovery app to this, joinwavy.com, which is real-life experiences made virtual. It's all about corporates hosting virtual events for their teams. And we have actually hosted a few of them at Willful. Here's an example of our cocktail making class. So they, got cocktail kits together and shipped them to each of the participants. And since they shifted this focus, since they took a risk and said no to their B2C audience and shifted to their B2B audience, the business has exploded. They've hosted events for Fortune 500 companies all the way down to startups of 15 people like ours. They have more demand than they know what to do with. And to be honest, their future is a lot brighter than it looked when it was on the B2C side. But they had to make a choice. And I think as entrepreneurs or as marketers, you're faced with this all the time, a need to focus. There are so many ideas in the day. There are so many opportunities that sometimes, as Steve Jobs says, saying no to 1,000 things allows you to focus on the one thing that's going to help you succeed. So I think Sean and her team and this, clear, conscious pivot and a discarding of her past business was really exemplary of the second quality of an entrepreneurial mindset, which is risk-taking. Inherently, when you're an entrepreneur, you are taking a risk by bringing something into this world that didn't previously exist, especially knowing the rates for how many small businesses succeed. And to me, risk-taking as an entrepreneur and as a marketer is all about ditching your comfort zone. I can't tell you the number of times when I worked at a big company, our startup Sprouter was acquired by Postmedia, one of the largest media companies across Canada. And when I spent about 18 months working there, the thing that always surprised me was this mentality that existed, which was, well, we've always done it that way, so why would we change? Or, that's not part of my job description, or kind of being disdainful of new social media platforms or new ideas. And to me, an entrepreneurial mindset is the antithesis of that. It's never saying, well, that's the way we've always done things, so we're not open to that. It is being open to jumping on tools like Clubhouse the moment you think about them, instead of thinking, oh, that's stupid, I'm not going to try something new. And I think Sean's team is really a great example of kind of taking a risk, getting out of your comfort zone, and so far, it really paying off. So for the third quality of the entrepreneurial mindset, I'm going to tell you a story about my husband, Kevin. I promise there's a reason. Now, Kevin is one of those born entrepreneurs I was talking about. In fact, he used to call me the dream killer because I was a technology journalist for a period of time. I met and interviewed startup founders every single day. And so Kevin would come home from his work as a tradesperson, and he would tell me his latest, greatest business idea. And I would inevitably poop all over it and say, I saw that idea last month. Oh, that's never going to work. So I earned this moniker, the dream killer. But Kevin has always been looking for that business idea, and his big ambition was always to start his own business, even though he had spent 5 or 10 years working in trades, working for other people. So when Kevin's uncle passed away unexpectedly a few years ago, and his family was really facing all these unanswered questions around his funeral and burial wishes, his celebration of life choices, where all of his important documents were stored. Kevin just kind of looked around and said, why are we still planning for end of life and planning for death like we were 50 years ago? He looked into it and found, the majority of us as Canadians don't have wills, don't have all of those things organized for our families. And there weren't really many online tools that actually made that process more accessible. And we were using tools in our personal lives like Wealthsimple to invest our money, and Airbnb when we traveled, and Uber to order food or to get around our city. But we didn't find something that existed in that space for estate planning. So he came to me one day it must have been 2016, and he said, I want to start an online platform that helps people plan for death and organize documents for their family. And I looked at him and I said, listen, I have 2 comments. Number 1, that is the first idea that you've brought me that I am not going to poo-poo, that I think is a fantastic idea. And number 2, could you please pick a less sexy business idea? Really, estate planning, this is what you're going to hang your hat on. And after we had a good laugh about that, we talked about the logistics of actually starting this business. As I mentioned, Kevin was not an entrepreneur by background. He was in trades. He had not gone to business school. He had never actually even worked a day in an office setting, and he wasn't technical. So he wanted to start a software business without being able to write a line of code. He also didn't have any money. We were in our late 20s, early 30s at this time, and we had just bought a property. So we didn't have a lot of extra money sitting around. And so Kevin had to kind of figure it out. He was able to find a developer that we went to high school with who agreed to come on at a discounted rate to help him build it. He, went to his family and managed to scrounge up a bit of funding from them or loans to be able to actually build a prototype. And after about a year of basically slogging his way through finding money, figuring out how to incorporate this company, tracking down lawyers who would actually work with him on drafting the legal content for the wills, finding a designer who was willing to help him design the site for very little money, he was able to actually bring this idea to life. And I think the picture may not have loaded here, so I'm just going to skip past it. But the byproduct of that is his company, Willful, which is an easy way for Canadians to create a will or power of attorney document online. And in John's bio that he read, he mentioned I was an advisor to Willful, which is true. When you're married to a startup founder, you are inherently basically an extended member of the team because you are their emotional support. But in this case, I also was a marketing advisor because I was running my agency at the time and had a lot of marketing ideas for him. But then he was able to convince me to actually come on board full time. So now I am the co-founder and CEO at Willful. He is my co-founder and he leads all of our new product development. And that tiny idea that came from this negative experience of a family member passing away and not knowing what to do has been grown into what is now a 15-person company that's raised almost $2 million in funding, that's created 50,000 documents for Canadians, and during COVID, that saw a big explosion in our business with almost 3,000 wills given out for free to healthcare workers, which is something we're really proud of. And I tell this story because to me, living alongside Kevin and seeing him really just slog it out day after day, setback after setback, to me, he highlights the third quality of the entrepreneurial mindset, which is resourcefulness. I remember when I joined Sprouter back in the day, I asked Sarah, why did you hire me? I was very inexperienced when you plucked me from this first job of mine to come work at your startup. What did you really see in me? And she said, when I hire someone to work at a business of mine, I look for one thing, and that's resourcefulness. I don't care if you have all the answers. I just care that you can find them on your own. And to me, resourcefulness in entrepreneurship is all about finding a way despite limits. And I think there's such an important lesson here about marketing, because when you're a small business, you don't have the $1 million Super Bowl ad budgets of the big companies. So you're not able to just do the obvious marketing things. And often small business owners become early adopters of tools like Clubhouse or any other kind of new platform because they're priced out of all of the traditional things. But in my opinion, that's what gives us such an edge as small business owners. We are forced to be creative. We are forced to be resourceful and to find ways to grow our brand in inexpensive ways. And by focusing on those kind of underutilized channels, we're also able to capture market share from the big companies before they even catch on and know that we're doing it. So I'm going to throw up a blacked out slide. You are supposed to be seeing that because I don't want to ruin the punchline of my final story. And I'm very happy to say my final story is an Alberta story. So I belong to a speaking agency called Speaker Spotlight. And one year at the Christmas party, when we were allowed to go to Christmas parties in person, I met this really interesting entrepreneur named Graham Sherman. And I said, what's your deal? Tell me about your story. What do you speak about? And he said, I speak about entrepreneurship. I speak about this. And I said, well, tell me the story of your business. So he said, well, I used to be in the military. I lived overseas, and, I was the IT guy in the military. So I was not out in the field. And when all of the other guys and gals, I would be kind of trying to amuse myself at the base. And so I started brewing beer in the tool shed behind the barracks. And when I got back to Calgary and I, resigned from military life and went into just being a regular civilian, I was thinking about, what do I want to do next? And I had brought that hobby home with me from overseas, and I had been brewing beer in the tool shed in my backyard. And so when I was thinking about, what do I want to do next, it was a natural fit for me to say, well, I'm going to start a brewery. But there was a couple problems. Building a brewery is expensive. You can't it's not like a software company where you can just pay $5 to Shopify and you're off and running. So Graham basically went to every family member that he could. He went to the bank. He got a second mortgage on his house. He raised funding from anyone that he could to raise all of the money that he needed to build this brewery and to bring his idea to life. And then he said, a couple months before the project was supposed to be done, he learned the hard lesson that most of us as entrepreneurs learn, which is it always takes longer than you think it's going to, and it always costs way more than you think it's going to launch a business or do anything within your startup. And so he found himself $200,000 short of his budget to complete the project. And he told me about a night that he was just laying awake, sweating and so nervous because he knew he'd have to get up the next morning and tell his wife that, they had to, sell the house or they had to claim bankruptcy. There was no other way that he could find funding. He had tapped out every single friend, every family member, every bank, and he was just at his wit's end. And that night he went to bed and he woke up in the morning with an idea. Because Graham's the kind of guy that doesn't give up easily. So he woke up in the morning and had an idea of selling lifetime beer memberships for $5,000 each to people in the Calgary community. And these $5,000 beer memberships would get them unlimited beer for life from a brewery that didn't exist yet, for a beer that they didn't even know if they liked. So it kind of sounded like a tenuous sales pitch. But to Graham's credit, he went out and sold $200,000 worth of these beer memberships at $5,000 a pop to people based solely on his vision, his story, and his promise of what could be. He was able to finish that brewery project and launch it. And now you may recognize Graham as the founder of Toolshed Brewing, which is one of the top breweries in Calgary and one of the top craft beer companies across the country. And I'm happy to say that through COVID, Toolshed has still been thriving because if there's anything we're all doing during this time, it's imbibing just a little bit more. Now, the favorite part of the story, when I was chatting with Graham, he told me this story and I said, wow, that's amazing. That's so fantastic that you were able to persevere and get this brewery launched. And he said, yeah, well, that's just kind of my personality. It's kind of like the time I ran a marathon without any training. And I paused and said, pardon? He said, yeah, my buddy bet me that I couldn't run a marathon without any training, so I decided to try it. And I'm like, Graham, people train for years to run a marathon. Most people never run a marathon because it's so difficult. How on earth did you think that you were going to be able to do this? And he said, well, I realized very quickly after I was starting the marathon, I'd made a huge mistake. I wasn't allowed to do anything. I wasn't a jogger. I didn't work out. I showed up that day of the marathon and I was, totally out of shape. I had terrible shoes. But once I started going, it was only about halfway through where I realized, oh my goodness, I've made a horrible mistake. Everything was aching. And if you've ever ran a marathon or run a business, you know that it's really a mental game more than anything. So even though his body was aching, it was the mental side of it that was really proving challenging. And halfway through, he thought about quitting. But he said to me, all I could picture was my sons. They were waiting for me at the finish line. And if I didn't actually finish, I would be teaching them that it's okay to give up when things get tough. And so I steeled myself and I told myself the only way through is through. and he finished that marathon, and his son saw him do it. And he actually went on to run many more marathons. He's since completed an Ironman, which is pretty crazy. And my favorite part of this story is that Graham actually, I followed up with him and asked him about a year after I initially met him, how's it going? Have you run any more marathons? Your story is in my presentation. I love telling it. And he sent me this photo of him with his Guinness Book of World Records certificate for running the most number of runners who linked arms and completed a marathon. So Graham's story is absolutely incredible. He's a fantastic success story from Alberta, and I think he's representative of the final quality of the entrepreneurial mindset, which is perseverance and the ability to embrace failure. And I love this quote that I found about failure. And the quote goes, "The very first company I started failed with a great bang. The second failed a little bit less, but still failed. The third one, proper failed, but it was kind of okay. I recovered quickly. Number 4 almost didn't fail. It still didn't really feel great, but it did okay. And number 5 was PayPal." And that quote is from Max Levchin, the co-founder of PayPal. And I just think it's such a great way to exemplify that as small business owners, we always hear about these overnight successes, but what we don't always hear about are the moments of failure. And whether your company fails or whether it's just a marketing campaign or idea that doesn't land, we all experience that. But to me, the entrepreneurial mindset is all about learning from failure, about seeing it as an opportunity, and about taking a test and learn approach to everything you do in your business and being intentional about taking those learnings and turning them into future success. So to me, those are the 4 qualities of the entrepreneurial mindset: open-mindedness, risk-taking, resourcefulness, and perseverance. And I call those 4 qualities the blank slate effect. Really, this idea of when you're an entrepreneur, everything is a blank slate for you. And so you have an opportunity to start fresh, to be open-minded, and to do things in a little bit of a different way. So then the question becomes, well, how do you actually apply this mindset to your marketing programs to be more successful with them? And I've worked with dozens of startups on their marketing programs, not to mention I've built my own companies and brands over the years. So I'm going to walk you through my approach and hopefully some takeaways that you can put into action at your own company in 2021. And I'm going to talk about 3 phases of marketing: coming up with great ideas, launching those ideas into the world, and then analyzing those ideas and learning from them over time. So let's talk first about ideation. How do you actually apply this mindset to your marketing program? Well, I want to tell you a story that I think exemplifies how you can actually be more intentional, about looking at your marketing program with an open mind. So a few years ago, I was running my agency, and we were working with the Toronto International Film Festival on an idea. They were a client of a partner agency of ours that did design and development, and they came to us with this idea. They said, we're tasked with getting more millennials to engage with the Toronto International Film Festival. It's an overwhelming festival. There's dozens of movies. It's very, very hard to navigate. And TIFF is really looking to make a connection with these folks. And they have, a website, and they advertise on bus shelters. But I feel like this younger audience, their target customer persona for this campaign, just isn't hanging out in those places. So what if we actually built a chatbot that, hang on a second here. What if we built a chatbot that actually helped us to reach those younger audiences by engaging with them on Facebook Messenger? And that's where the idea for TIFFbot came up. So TIFFbot is this robot film critic that we developed, launched it on Facebook Messenger a few years ago to promote the Toronto International Film Festival. And TIFFbot looked very much like this. So it was you chatting back and forth on Facebook Messenger, seeing, previews for movies, being able to filter them by category, learning a little bit more about the festival. And we were able to engage with, tens of thousands of younger moviegoers through TIFFbot, and to get media coverage in publications all over Hollywood, as well as all over Canada, both in technology and in entertainment. And I think it was this great example of how, when you're thinking about the ideation process, it's all about asking yourself, are we doing this because it's the best idea or because it's what we've always done? It's really easy to get stuck in this loop of the same old marketing tactics, social media and an email newsletter and sending a gift basket around the holidays if you're a B2B. So this is really about getting creative and playing taboo with your marketing ideas. So getting your team together, and when you do a brainstorm for an idea, almost having this list like you would in a game of taboo of things that you're not allowed to build on or you're not allowed to do because you've already done them in the past. So if you really love sending that email newsletter, you have to come up with another idea that is fresh that does not include that email newsletter. And this is not about boiling the ocean. It's not about trying every new social media platform that comes out. It's really just about going back to the fundamentals of marketing. Who are my customers? Who are the personas of the people who are buying my product? And where do they spend their time online and offline? And how has that changed over the last 1, 3, 5, 10 years? So for example, at Willful, our target customer is new parents. Most of the people that buy wills on our platform do so because they have kids and they want to be able to assign guardians for them, etc. So for us, we think about where do new parents hang out? And that's, Facebook groups for moms. That's, parenting communities offline. That's parenting publications like Today's Parent. You should do the same. Build that customer persona. List out the 2 or 3 people that are most likely to buy your product or service and go through that exercise of actually interviewing some of those people and asking them, what do you read? Who do you follow? Which influencers do you pay attention to? Which online communities are you a part of? And really see if your marketing tactics actually reach those people in the places where they spend their time. The next phase is delivery. So once you've come up with a great idea, how do you make sure that you're getting it out into the world? And this is all about, again, trying new channels and new ways to deliver campaigns. It can be really easy to just default to doing the same old things in the same old way. And really an entrepreneurial mindset is about always being open and receptive to new things. I mentioned Clubhouse earlier, and I remember my dad, who was a lifelong journalist in late 2000s. He was approached by his editor at the newspaper, who said, Henry, if you're going to stay on as a reporter here, you've been here for 30 years, you're going to have to learn how to run our social media and how to podcast. And my dad just said, nope, I'm out. I do not want any part of this. And I think he kind of said, I don't want to learn new stuff. Well, not everyone can retire when faced with the idea of actually doing something new. And I have to admit, I was guilty when I first saw TikTok of, oh, that's just for the young kids. Oh, that's not something that's relevant to my business. But during the pandemic, I actually joined TikTok because I was getting funny videos from friends and thought, I'll give this a whirl. And a few weeks after joining, I saw that there was a lot of older millennials like myself in our mid-30s and older who were actually using it just as much as that younger demographic of teenagers. And I also started to notice that there was a lot of businesses on there that were promoting their own thought leadership, from dental hygienists talking about teeth health to nutritionists who were promoting healthy recipes. And I didn't see one person who was talking about estate planning and wills. And I know it's not the sexiest topic, as I told Kevin when he came to me with the idea, but I thought, knowing that new parents are a big audience of ours and there's lots of them on TikTok, I'm going to try it out. So I created this profile and I did an experiment. A couple weeks last summer, I filmed a bunch of videos after consuming content on the app for about 4 months and getting to know, how people use it and what creators are doing. And I filmed a bunch of these videos that were all educational about estate planning, what makes a will legal and how can you create one and when do you need to update it. But I set them all to these TikTok memes that creators were using. And I actually, within a couple weeks, had over 200,000 views on these videos, thousands of likes. But more importantly, I had lots of comments from people who were asking questions, who were saying, oh my goodness, I need to get my will done. Thanks for providing education on this. And it was really this wake-up call that a lot of people, especially traditional folks in bigger organizations, dismiss new tactics and delivery methods as soon as they come out because they don't know anything about them. And I think as entrepreneurs and small businesses, we have such an opportunity to go into these things with an open mind, to set up those accounts, to play around with them, to tinker, or to have folks on our team do that so that we're not immediately dismissing something like TikTok as soon as it comes out. And my favorite moment was when a customer emailed our customer service line and said, I bought my will today because I saw Erin on TikTok. So there you go. So my challenge to you is, what are 3 new marketing channels that you can try? Can you get on Clubhouse and host a call about your area of expertise? Could you write an op-ed for your local publication if that's something you've never tried? Or can TikTok maybe be a method that works for you? So finally, I know we want to leave some time for questions. I have one last tip, which is, how do you actually apply that entrepreneurial mindset to measuring the success of the things that you're doing? So if you do test something on TikTok, if you run a podcast ad for the first time, how do you actually know whether it was successful and how to move forward? And I wanted to tell you about this framework called Design for Delight that Intuit uses. Willful had the opportunity in the fall to join the first Intuit Prosperity Accelerator, which is all about helping teach us this Design for Delight methodology that they use at Intuit to build and improve their products like TurboTax and QuickBooks. And they have this, publicly available framework that they call Design for Delight, and it's all about the intersection of these 3 things. It starts with deep customer empathy, going back to speaking to your customers and building customer personas, talking to your customers and understanding what their pain points are and their problems are. Then it's about designing experiments and really going broad and testing a bunch of those things. So for example, an experiment might be, a phone appointment service to help people purchase your product. It might be a TikTok advertising test. It might be running Instagram shoppable ads for the first time. I don't know what that is, but running experiments to reach those customers and solve that problem. And then running those experiments and looking at the results of them and honing in on the ones that worked and discarding the ones that didn't. And as we went through this program, we've really completely adjusted the way that we look at product development and marketing at Willful to adopt this mentality, this idea of talking to our customers all the time, being extremely close to them, understanding their challenges, and being extremely experimental and intentional about experimenting with marketing. We have an experiments tracker where we record every single experiment that we're running with clear hypothesis statements for what we think is going to happen and very clear desired outcomes. So this is not just about putting things out into the ether and hoping they work. It's about having a hypothesis statement like, I think I can use TikTok to drive engagement and ultimately sales from a millennial and Gen X audience, and then actually being intentional about measuring the impact of those things. And I encourage you to check out the Design for Delight framework if you're interested in learning more about how you can implement this into your own marketing practices. And ultimately, applying an entrepreneurial mindset to the measurement and analysis side of your marketing is all about building a culture that encourages rapid experimentation and testing. And that's something that we've really committed to as an organization in 2021. So we talked today about how entrepreneurs are born, but how they're also made. We've talked about the 4 qualities of the entrepreneurial mindset and how I think they make up this thing that I call the blank slate effect, which helps entrepreneurs be more successful. And we've talked about how you can actually apply that to your marketing program by coming up with fresh ideas, delivering those in places that you haven't typically done that, and analyzing the success of those experiments to be able to inform your future decisions. So before I leave you today and before I hand it back to John for questions, I'm leaving you with 5 questions that I encourage you to either reflect on, maybe in your Mahara journal, or to kind of take back to your team for your next brainstorm. The first question is, are we doing things the way that we've always done them? And does our culture encourage new ideas and taking risks? Question 2 is, how has the behavior of our consumers changed? And are we changing our behavior along with them? Question 3 is, if we were a new company starting today, would we still be marketing in the same ways? Would you still be using the same tactics if you were launching your business in 2021 versus in 2011? Would you be using the same messaging, the same creative, the same designs? 4th, do you have a test budget that actually allows and empowers your team to try new platforms, new ideas, and new delivery methods? Are you going to say no right off the bat if someone comes to you and says, I want to try TikTok advertising? If you don't have that test budget in place, what do you need to ensure that you have one and that you are encouraging this culture of testing and experimentation? And then finally, how are you measuring success with your marketing program today? And how will that change as you adopt new platforms and tools in the future? So I want to say thank you for attending today and listening to stories about who I think are incredibly resourceful and risk-taking entrepreneurs. I know a lot of you listening today are also those people, and I wish you the most success with your businesses moving forward through COVID and beyond. So I will now hand it back over to John for some Q&A before we end the session.
Erin, thank you so much. That was great. Your insights were bang on and really awesome to hear. I love how you couched all of your points in stories. It just really speaks to that power of storytelling and narrative. There a couple of questions came through. One, looking for a little advice on the top choices for social media platforms to focus marketing efforts to start an environmentally focused podcast. Any sort of insight they can give with that?
Yeah, great question. And thanks, John. I love hearing stories about entrepreneurs, how I built this. Speaking of podcasts, How I Built This is a great podcast if you love hearing stories about entrepreneurs. So when I was running my marketing agency, we did a lot of social media management for brands. And I found that every small business owner I ever talked to had this inclination to boil the ocean when it came to social media. They would come to us and say, I need help. I'm not seeing results from social media. And I would say, okay, well, which social media platforms are you using? And they'd send me their Pinterest page and their LinkedIn and their Instagram and their Twitter and their Facebook, and the list went on. And I think what I always try to do when I talk to small business owners is to say, do not boil the ocean. Especially if you don't have a team, especially if you don't have external agencies or vendors, and it's really just you and your own time, you cannot afford to be on every single platform, nor can you do it well. So I always go back to that question of customer persona. If I'm building a podcast for people who are interested in the environment, where are those people most likely to be hanging out? I don't know if that's a LinkedIn podcast. If I was starting a sales podcast or a management podcast, absolutely. LinkedIn would be where I would focus my efforts. But actually, if I was starting with people who are passionate about the environment, I would actually be thinking about what are the Facebook groups that I could tap into, like the zero waste Facebook groups where people can actually be sharing tips with each other. I'd be thinking about environmental influencers, eco-friendly influencers and minimalists who are spending time on Instagram, and the influencers who I could engage to actually tell that message to. And then I'd be thinking about, okay, probably something like Twitter where I can connect with journalists, where I can connect with like-minded people and other companies in real time. So I'd think less about the network itself, and I'd start with, again, who is your customer? Where are they spending time online? And how can I actually become a part of those communities or advertise to them relevantly? And if you don't know the answer to that, interview some of them. Do a call out, leverage your network, and find 5 to 10 people who fit your target listener and ask them. And that will help you to determine where to spend your time on the key 2 to 3 places instead of spreading yourself too thin across every network out there.
So don't boil the ocean.
Exactly.
Let's see, we got another one here. And hello, Erin. My name is Nicole. I'm a student entrepreneur, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Super eye-opening. And Nicole's question is, how do you know when to move on from one idea to the next? Say, for example, you're testing an idea and you're faced with a couple of failures. How do you know when to move on?
Nicole, first of all, thank you. And kudos on being a student and launching a business. I definitely spent most of my university career renting VHS tapes of CSI from Blockbuster and watching them because that's how old I am. It's a great question. So we talked a little bit today about testing and learning from marketing ideas, but we didn't really talk about validating your business idea. And to me, it really goes back to, I'll tell actually a story about failure that I think helps to illustrate this. I told you the story of Willful, and I made it sound like, it was tough, but it was this big success. But what I left out was that Kevin's original idea for the company was called Final Blueprint, which sounds more like an architecture firm, but that's a story for another day. And he wanted to focus on all the things outside of the will. So he bought the URL and he started designing the platform, and he asked, his friends and family, would you buy this? Do you think it's a great idea? Everyone said, absolutely. And the day that he launched it, crickets. I think to this day, the only people that paid for that product are myself and his mom. And he learned this cardinal rule, which is number one, you have to validate that not only is an idea solving a problem, but that people will pay for it. That is key. You can't just have something that solves a problem. That's not a business. And he learned a second valuable lesson, which is it's so important to talk to people in your target customer base whom you don't know, who are not your friends and family, because they are biased and they are always going to tell you that something is a good idea, unless they're me, unless they're a dream killer. So my advice here is as many ideas as it takes to find the one that meets that intersection of a problem that's being solved and people are willing to pay for it. And it's so easy these days to validate an idea. You can throw up a landing page on Unbounce in 5 seconds. You can launch a Shopify store and try selling something for less than $100. You can run a Facebook ad targeted to a specific group without ever having to do any of the actual product development, just to validate a concept. And I know entrepreneurs who do that all the time. And those reactions to those tests are what lead them down either leaving an idea and maybe pursuing it later and doing more testing and validation, or actually pursuing something. And to me, the answer is, great, you've showed that 2 ideas don't work. Maybe you'll come across 20 that don't until you find that one that does. There's no magic number, but you're thinking about it the right way. And you are going to find that intersection of solves a problem that's big enough to actually grow into a business and that people will pay for, and you'll know when you hit it on it. So hopefully that's helpful, and good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Absolutely. And that it also feeds into kind of the 4 qualities you were talking about, your blank slate. Risk taker, 1 part open-mindedness, 1 part resourcefulness, and 1 part perseverance. You got to stay at it. Success doesn't come right away. Now we've got a couple of minutes left, and we've had a question that's regarding communications. Now, let's say it's a high-tech company, and communications with high-tech technology, sometimes it's not really easy to grasp. Is there any advice for how to go about doing that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is when you have a technical product, it can be really easy to slip into jargon. And I've been a mentor to some startup accelerator programs, and I've been pitched by entrepreneurs. And at the end of their pitch, I will truly have no idea what they've just said because they work in high finance or they work in a really technical space. The key to communications when you're an entrepreneur, whether you have a complex product or not, is that you have to break things down in a way that anybody can understand. And I always call it the grandmother test. If you went to your grandma or someone else's grandma and you told them your pitch deck or you told them about your idea, would they understand you? And really it's about removing jargon, and it's about framing things in stories. If I came to you and I said, everyone needs a last will and testament, it's very important to appoint an executor, blah, 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 there would be legalese in there that you maybe didn't understand. And I don't know if it would create an emotional connection. But when I tell you, yeah, we had a family member pass away, they didn't have this legal document, it was super important, it caused all these problems, it helps to frame it in a personal experience, and it removes all of that jargon. So I would recommend write out your story and then deliver it to people who have no knowledge of your space. And if any aspect of it is confusing, try removing the jargon and try wrapping it in a personal story or a story that anyone can relate to that highlights the problem that exists and how you're solving it.
That's great advice. Thank you. One final question. Now, you talked a little bit about family and the role that family plays. You had identified yourself as the dream killer. What role does family play and the people close around an entrepreneur, and then going more broadly to the innovation ecosystem itself?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question before. I think it's such a great one because we always see these successful entrepreneurs like Toby from Shopify, and we don't necessarily see the parents, the siblings, the significant others, the kids that are behind the scenes who, may not see dad for 5 years because he's building Canada's next big e-commerce juggernaut. So the role to me that family plays is often capital. Friends and family funding is often one of the first types of funding that you can get, even if it's a $500 check from that person you went to high school with. Many of the company's most successful country's most successful startup companies were founded with initial small checks from friends and family. Number two is emotional support. Building a company is hard. And even if you think someone's an overnight success, chances are they had 5 to 7 years of a slog to get there. I always like to joke that Kevin had an emotional breakdown pretty much like clockwork every other week when he was starting the business. And I don't think that's dissimilar to other folks. And so you really have to be able to be supportive through that, to kind of remind them the only way through is through. It's going to get better. There's going to be ups and downs in this. And I'm here for you and for what you need. And then I think the role that they play as they grow is kind of being part of the company. It's really rare to have a startup that grows and to not have the family involved. I know people their spouse is their bookkeeper, their kids are interning with them. They man the door at their events. Like, they're always involved in it. So to me, it's capital, emotional support, and then actual logistics of the business and pitching in when you can't afford people and your family is pitching in to help. So if you are watching and you are not an entrepreneur, but you want to support your family, those are the biggest ways that you can be supportive to them.
Erin, thank you so much. Your insight was wonderful, and it was really great to hear you talk. We went a few minutes over. I apologize, but thank you. And we're going to be posting this as a recorded event. People will be able to find it on the Unbound platform. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. And Erin, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.